this is a ball bearing. They've been around for ages and they have uses in both children's toys all the way up to industrial machining. Well, on this channel, you guys have seen me make some knives and swords and some pretty funky things, but never anything quite like this. You see, today we're going to be asking the age-old question, can you make a pocket knife with only a ball bearing?
And yes, I do mean only.
Now the first challenge we're going to face is that the ball bearing is actually seized up, meaning it doesn't want to move and it's kind of locked together. To fix this, I'm going to be cutting each part, that way we can crack it open and actually have something usable. Oh my goodness gracious.
All right, now we just got to crack it open like an egg. Huh, that's pretty cool.
Ow. Now that our parts have been separated, we need to begin to forge them, and for that, we have to light the forge.
I guess you know it's time to forge your blade then. I guess so. Now this forge is only big enough for the one of us. Let's settle this the old-fashioned way. You ain't got the balls. Try me.
Well, anyways, while that heats up, I want to talk about our design. The type of knife I'm making is called a friction folder. These are pocket knives that are made up of three main parts. You start out with a blade, and then you have a shell, which also acts as a handle, and then you have hardware, which holds everything together and allows it to pivot. Now for my design, I'm going to be basing it off of a maker by the name of Toma Fiends. He's a maker based out of Romania who does some really beautiful work, most of which has some form of Japanese raised inlay involved. More specifically, the knife that inspired me to do this project is this friction folder he did, which has this beautiful butterfly and ginkgo leaf motif. Toma, your work is awesome, so let's go ahead and forge out the blade, starting out by cutting it to length, as this is way too much material.
Bringing that stock down to a much more manageable thickness, then we can begin to forge out our isolation that'll be the tang or the sort of stopper for our friction folder. So let's do that.
Now the majority of our blade has been forged, what I'm going to do is take a hot cutting tool on the edge of the anvil to go through and make another isolation that'll basically set up like a shelf on the back of the knife. This basically is an aesthetic decision as well as trying to get things as close to forged as possible. That way it really has that rough forged look. Once forging is finished, we can normalize the blade before moving on to grinding it. Now the key thing here is I want to just get it nicely profiled while preserving as much of a forged texture as I possibly can. So let's do that. The next step in this project is we need to make the handle, or the shell. Now, to do this, we're going to take that piece that we cut off earlier and try to flatten it out. But as you can see, this doesn't really go all that well.
Yep, that's not enough material.
What we did end up using, though, is the first piece that we cut off from the start of the video. We're essentially just going to cut this off to length, and then we're going to try to squish it out to get the width that we need for our shell, or our taco later on.
Tuesday!
Nope, the joke went too far. So now that our taco's been forged, what I'm going to do is take a piece of flat stock to act as a sort of space holder. That way we can forge it to have a flat inside. This will allow for a perfectly fitting slot for our blade later on. Alright, now the big key thing here is I need to have an understanding of where this pivot point is going to go, and that way I know where to cut in my recess portion back here to allow for this back lever to fall into place. Because that's kind of what locks it into place then, is your grip will hold that, and this acts as a lever to keep everything secured. So now we need to basically carve out this back portion here. All right, so it is now the next day, and we have our several different parts here. We have our shell, our blade, and then we also have this little bearing that we forged out, and that's going to be our sort of washer or spacer on the outside of the shell to prevent things from kind of locking up on themselves. All this being said, there is one more part that we need to make, and for that we're going to be using this. This is either bronze or copper. I'm thinking it's copper, but either way it's going to work, so let's go ahead and forge it down into a pin. because we obviously can't use it from this. Wait a minute. Now this next step in the process is by far one of the most beautiful parts about bladesmithing. We're going to be doing a traditional Japanese raised inlay. Now I've done this before on my channel, but I haven't done anything like this, and that is that today we're going to be doing our first figuro inlay. This essentially means that instead of just inlaying a flower or something inanimate, I'm going to be inlaying a salamander, or a frizzard, as the people on the live stream called it. I also think it's worth mentioning that the piece of inlay material I'm going to be using is the same thing as we made the pin out of. I just basically flattened that out into a little sheet that I then traced in my salamander shape on. Doing it this way allowed me to stay true to the challenge of using only the ball bearing in this entire process. Alright, now that we got ourselves a design, it's time to pierce it out with the old jewelry saw. Arrgh. Just like that. Now wait a minute, I bet you're wondering why we never actually heat treated or ground the blade, and that's for a very good reason, namely being that I didn't know if I was going to put any inlay on the blade, but now that we know that's not the case, we can move on to the next step. I'm going to start by putting in a hollow grind with a small 4-inch wheel. It's very important if you do a hollow grind to make sure that the radius of the wheel is set up to the edge of the blade in relation to how you want it. If you don't, what could end up happening is you could actually grind a little divot through the center of your blade. Once we have rough ground the bevels though, what we can do is move on to heat treating. Now that all our parts are ready, the last step is final assembly, and this is where I'm really thankful that that material was actually bronze because it peens over really nicely. It's super critical though that if you're going to do this yourself to make sure you have these washers because those are what prevent the knife from seizing up on itself and allows for free movement later on. What is that? Alright, maybe I was leading you on just a little bit there, but essentially what happened is my small radius hollow grinding didn't exactly go to plan, and I ended up doing exactly what I warned you about previously. Now typically you would remake the blade for a project like this, but I wanted to stop and kind of segue into this entire project has just been a large practice piece for the katana project I've been working on the past month or two. I really am not underestimating when I say that this will be my biggest and coolest build yet here on my channel, and so if you want to see us try to split a bullet, water quench a katana, and make something worthy of the prestige that follows these swords, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it.